Welcome to Verdict with Ted Cruz, Week in Review. Ben Ferguson with you, and here are the stories that you may have missed that we talked about this week. First up, the Democratic National Committee is broke. They literally have crashed out financially. What caused it, and could it be the communists, socialists, and Marxists that are in the Democratic Party? We explain it to you. Plus, Dr. Anthony Fauci. He had nothing to say before Congress. Why? He's afraid he's going to go to jail. And we have the receipts of what he said in the past compared to what he's not saying now. And finally, an invasion in real time happening in Spain. So what are the socialists in Spain doing? Apparently, absolutely nothing. And why this is a warning for America if the Democrats get back in power. It's the Weekend Review, and it starts right now. If you want to know how much the Democratic Socialists of America have a hold right now on the Democratic Party, this is abnormal. Going into a midterm, so people understand, usually the party that is out of power, the people that support them, whether you're Republican or Democrat, if you're in the minority, you usually have a lot of fundraising because then you say, okay, now my ideals are under threat. I'm no longer taking them for granted. This other side has got power. We want to get it back. And usually you have a surge in fundraising. It is typical to see the party out of power have a great amount of cash come in once their ideals, what they believe in, are under attack. The Democratic National Committee does not have the money. In fact, we're now being told that going into the midterms, they're in essence completely broke.
Well, that's right, and our source for that is admittedly a very right-wing outlet, so you've got to take what they say with a grain of salt, and that would, of course, be the New York Times. And the New York Times, I want to read from the beginning of the article. Inside the phone-throwing drama at the troubled, broke Democratic Party. The Democrats should be well-positioned to make gains in this year's midterms. But inside party headquarters every week brings paranoia, worries about money, and, on occasion, emotional eruptions. The Democratic Party is so short on cash that leaders at its headquarters have undertaken a new gambit to mask the severity of problems, asking vendors not to send bills until after the midterm elections. The bookkeeping maneuver, which was described by three people briefed on it, is the latest sign of financial duress for the DNC, and as its embattled leader, as money troubles threaten to undercut Democratic momentum with 100 days until the midterms. And to give you a sense of the money differential directly, here's what the New York Times says. The Democratic Party and its allies are far beyond Republicans when it comes to money. Mr. Trump controls a $400 million super PAC, and the Republican National Committee is sitting on nearly $130 million. Where's the DNC? $2 million in debt.
Wow.
When you have the New York Times saying, what in the hell is going on with you people? It goes on to say, trusted Mr. Martin, the head of the DNC, was sapped by his handling of a long-promised autopsy of the 2024 election. Late last year, he said he would not release the document, but then as criticism mounted, he released an incomplete draft that featured searing annotations from the DNC that undermined the report. Now, Mr. Martin is both paralyzed by the idea of leaks and surrounded by them. During a May meeting with the full staff of the DNC, days after the draft autopsy's release, he admitted that times were tough, and he chided his team for revealing to reporters what was happening inside party headquarters. Quote, "It pisses me off when I see leaks out of this building. No more." Mr. Martin said he saw a lot of down faces and people hanging their heads. Keep your heads up. Keep a smile on. My success is your success. So the weaker I am, the weaker all of you are. Well, what kind of manager is this fella? Let me tell you. Well, this is clearly someone who knows how to watch his pennies. Here's another quote from the New York Times article. The single biggest expense of the Martin era. What do you think that was, Ben?
I'm going to go with private jets just because I know how much they love those private jets, the DNC.
I have every certainty the private jet bill is massive, but that was not the single biggest expenditure. The single biggest expenditure was $7.3 million to buy the remnants of Kamala Harris's campaign list from her failed 2024 bid. Ms. Harris' Political Action Committee then used that money to cover additional remaining debts. So that's his biggest expenditure. is bailing out Kamala Harris's bankrupt campaign rather than actually trying to win elections going forward. And here's a little more about his very gentle, experienced management style. Another paragraph from the New York Times. Mr. Martin's fraying nerves are showing. In a peak of frustration in early July, he threw his phone at the desk of a junior aide while upbraiding the person. The phone tossing incident resulted in a formal complaint to the DNC's Human Resources Department. The fallout from the phone throwing episode was described by half a dozen people familiar with the incident, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss internal party matters. None of them witnessed the account, and there was some dispute over how aggressively the phone was tossed. Mr. Martin was said to have thrown the phone at the desk rather than the aide. Look,
there you go. That makes it better.
There you go. You know what? Somehow I've managed to live 55 years on planet Earth, to work in a bunch of different offices, to work with a lot of people, to have a lot of people working for me. I've magically managed to refrain from throwing a phone at anybody. I got to say, at any desk. I've got to say it hasn't been difficult. I think the only thing I've ever thrown at anyone who works for me is I have thrown a Nerf basketball. So if that counts, I'll plead guilty to that. But when it comes to like not throwing hard metal objects at your employees, that does not take massive restraint.
Yeah, no, I guess it doesn't. It doesn't boost morale. It's incredible. That is the Democratic Party heading into midterms.
Although I do need to come clean. Although I haven't thrown anything at one young Benjamin.
This is true. You have broken bones.
I have in fact broken his finger. So maybe it's
still
even
crooked, folks. There it is. You see the crookedness there, folks. You see. I just want everybody watching to see that is not straight anymore. That is a Ted Cruz broken bone right there. I just want to be clear about that.
Look, it's important to acknowledge that you have this, big strapping Division I college athlete, this like Studley. And if you don't know how Studley he is, give Ben a minute. He'll tell you how Studley he is. He's very proud of being a Division I college athlete. And he's playing hoops with little old me, a college debater. And I'm just saying the consequence of playing hoops is bones are broken. And
when you're losing, Ted doesn't play fair. That's what I learned from that. When you're losing, Ted doesn't play fair. And this is what happens. It's crooked for life.
So you're admitting to our listeners that not only did your finger get broken, but you also lost. That's good.
No.
I'm glad you are on the record.
Losing.
I don't think so. No,
the finger was broken.
No. I think
by the way, do you want to know
the finger lies.
Do you want to know what I keep on my desk? This is a true story. So we were in Austin. We were playing the game. This is the remnants of the tape that is still left that I used to tape said finger together, the crooked finger right there, and keep playing an entire another game. So I kept it as that's romantic.
Well, Ben, just don't ever say I never gave you anything.
Now, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go back and listen to the full podcast from earlier this week. Now on to story number 2. I want talking about lunatics. I got to get to this other big story that deals with Anthony Fauci. So thank you. I've never said this before to Anthony Fauci, but thank you for keeping a really, really good diary, because now we have his record of what he was worried about during COVID when it was exploding. And it all went back to what I would describe as psychotic narcissism. He was obsessed with being famous. He loved being the center of attention. He also, I think, clearly knew that, and there's new accusations out that he was lying about the side effects of COVID-19 vaccines, some of which apparently affected him personally, but he did not disclose to the public.
Yeah, look, Fauci is the single most dangerous bureaucrat in American history. He's a megalomaniac. He loved the press, and he was willing to implement policies that hurt Americans, and he was willing to lie. So, for example, Fauci played a critical role in shutting down schools all across America.
Yeah.
Now, when America saw devastating results, we have witnessed, I actually think a decade or two from now, people will look back at the school shutdowns during COVID and marvel at what an idiotic policy this country pursued as sort of mass psychosis. We have seen, and the data demonstrate this, the largest learning loss in recorded history. Since we began measuring the learning of our students.
Yeah.
The biggest learning loss came from the COVID shutdowns. And by the way, the racial gap, the gap between black and white students, the gap between Hispanic and white students,
exploded.
grew more than during the COVID lockdowns, again, than any time since it's been recorded. Now, once it became irrefutable that the school shutdowns were a travesty, a disaster, Fauci's tried to back away and say, I didn't ask for the schools to be shut down. Well, a number of his private diary entries have been released. Here's what he wrote on March 15th, 2020. So this is pretty early in the COVID pandemic. He writes, quote, "Big day," it's written in red letters. "I spoke with Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York City, and convinced him, based on what I was saying publicly in my conversations tonight, to close the New York City schools. He had already decided based on what I was saying on TV." That's what he said in his private notes in March.
Amazing.
By the way, he said the same thing, quote, "I had a similar call with Ann O'Leary, the chief of staff of Governor Gavin Newsom in California, and said that based on my TV appearances today and yesterday, the governor has decided to close the schools in California as well as the bars and the restaurants." Now, seven months later, October 16th, 2020, ABC News is interviewing Fauci, and he denies he had any role in the lockdowns. He says, quote, "Let's go back and look at the transcript. We said we should try as best as possible we possibly can to keep the children in schools. Nobody plays that clip. They always come back and say Fauci was responsible for shutting schools down. I had nothing to do with it." Now, there's
Amazing.
a technical word for that. That's called a lie.
Yeah.
Also in 2022, he told The Hill that he, quote, "didn't recommend locking anything down." Well, his own private diary refutes that. By the way, January 2024, he said, quote, when he was testifying in the House of Representatives, "I did not close the schools." Fauci is dishonest. And the diary is unequivocal. 5 days later, here's what Fauci's diary says, quote, "Also had a phone call with Mayor de Blasio, who wants to go to shelter in place for the entire city, is asking my advice since Governor Cuomo is pushing back. I advised de Blasio to go ahead and do it. I will try to speak with Cuomo." So he's saying shut everything down. By the way, Fauci also in March of 2020 describes President Trump as incorrigible. This pattern and the rest of these diary entries are stunning. They reveal a megalomaniac. All right, here's another component that's fairly stunning. You remember Fauci laid out at great length that the source of COVID was not the Wuhan Institute for Virology.
Yes, so that was one of the big ones. And he got angry on TV when it was brought up.
It was not the Chinese government. It was not any of that. It was instead the wet market in China that occurred organically from like bat soup in the wet market that just jumped from animals. So here is what he wrote in January of 2020. So right at the outset, he wrote the following. "It now appears using epi-data and genomic data that the first infection was in early December and not connected to the market. The infection spread among people weeks before the Chinese reported that they were dealing with a new infection, and that gave the virus time to establish itself in multi-generational sustained spread. Remember, early on, the Chinese were saying that there is no human-to-human transmission, and that all the original 27 cases were from the market. Now we know the market was not the source. It was the amplifier. Having said that, somewhere the virus jumped from animals to humans." I want to repeat that sentence. Now we know the market was not the source. It was the amplifier. This was January of 2020, and Fauci repeatedly lied about this over and over again. And by the way, in March and April of 2020, for those who are longtime listeners to Verdict, we have a lot of new listeners to Verdict.
Yeah.
But in March and April of 2020, go back and listen to, I did 2 episodes on Verdict, where we laid out the evidence early in COVID
Yep.
that the weight of the evidence was the COVID virus came from the Wuhan Institute for Virology, where they were studying coronaviruses derived from bats, and that it escaped. I think it was likely an accidental lab leak. I think they were engaged in research, gain-of-function research, where they took existing viruses, they made them more dangerous, they made them more transmissible, more targeted at humans. I think they were studying them. And then they screwed up. They had lousy biosecurity measures, and I think a doctor or a researcher or someone got the disease, walked out and spread it to someone else and spread it to someone else, spread it to someone else. That is the most likely scenario. By the way, multiple U.S. government agencies now concur with that assessment. Fauci knew that at the outset.
And lied.
And he lied. It was straight out lying, and it was profoundly harmful.
You look at what we're seeing now in these notes. I love the transparency. There's some that are mad that this is put out saying, well, people aren't going to take accurate notes in the future if they think they're going to be outed. In this scenario, you should not be afraid of your notes unless you are lying and manipulating and covering
don't lie.
up. Yeah, just don't lie.
Don't lie.
Like, people are like, well, don't you want transparency? I'm like, of course. Like, well, if you out these types of notes, you're never going to get transparency again. I'm like, no, just don't be a pathological liar to the American people. And what we saw in these notes was on the biggest issues of COVID. And I think this is the core reason why I want to wrap it up and get your reaction to it. Now I understand why he needed a pardon, preemptive pardon, because I think it's abundantly clear.
He was lying and knew he was lying.
And quoting his own words, he was lying under oath to you guys who were questioning him in Congress.
And by the way, I also believe Fauci funded the gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He was covering his own rear end because his decision to fund reckless research was a direct cause, I believe, of the pandemic. Understand, this is not a new phenomenon for Fauci. I want to read an entry from his diary from 2013, so long before COVID happened.
2013.
January 14th, 2013. HHS turned me down on request from CNN Wolf Blitzer and Soledad O'Brien. I asked John Burkow to call up Bill Hall and find out what the heck is going on and what the reason for all of this is. John told me that CDC complaining to Bill Hall and HHS that I was getting all of the publicity on an issue, influenza tracking, that they considered was their issue. I do not know who at CDC did this. It could be anyone from Tom Frieden, I doubt this, to more likely Tom Skinner, CDC PR person. In any event, it has nothing to do with my use of the word epidemic on Wolf Blitzer's show, and everything to do with pure jealousy that I am a rock star stealing their thunder. Shame on the CDC. So this is 2013.
Yeah.
This man's own personal assessment. I want to read that sentence again. It has everything to do with pure jealousy that I am a quote-unquote rock star stealing their thunder. This is someone who's a narcissist who just wants to be on TV. So when we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're in the middle of a crisis, what did he want to do? He wanted to be on TV as the savior, as the solution, and he was willing to lie. He knew... Early on, he knew that the wet market is not where this virus came from, and yet he lied about that deliberately. And I think he did so, again, to cover his own culpability. And when it came to lockdowns, he repeatedly urged and advocated locking down schools, locking down small businesses, locking down churches, destroying people's livelihoods, destroying kids. There were tens of millions of kids in America who did not go to school for more than a year because of these lockdowns.
And ruin their education moving forward.
And by the way, the data show that learning loss will be with them the rest of their lives. When they're 80, they will still suffer the consequences. And he's borne no consequences for his own recklessness. This was egomaniacal, it was reckless, and it was wrong.
As before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation on this topic, you can go back and download the podcast from earlier this week to hear the entire thing. I want to get back to the big story, number 3 of the week you may have missed, including a massive invasion of illegal immigrants in Spain. And Dr. Fauci had a lot to say, sarcasm, insert it right there, in Washington, D.C. this week.
Well, Fauci's testimony before Congress was absolutely disgraceful. We're going to get into that in depth. But first, we're going to talk about what is happening in Spain, because it is outrageous, it is frightening, it is terrifying. If you have not watched these images online, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it on the YouTube show. If you haven't, go and Google. Watch it with your eyes, because I cannot, with my voice, do justice to what's happening in Spain. Spain is being invaded. Thousands upon thousands of people from Morocco are coming over, one after the other, and there's not another word to describe it. It is an invasion. It reminds me very much of what happened in Texas on the southern border, and in particular in Del Rio. And if you remember Del Rio, which is a town in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, it's a town of about 30,000 people. And in one day, more than 10,000 Haitian illegal immigrants crossed the Rio Grande, crossed into the United States, into the small town of Del Rio. It was an absolute invasion. I was there. I was there. In fact, I filmed it and put out the video of what was happening in Del Rio. You had thousands upon thousands of Haitians under a bridge, under a giant overpass, and it looked like the third world. It was suddenly in America. It looked like you were in Haiti. They were just basically shanty towns. Yeah. And it was designed by the Biden administration and the drug cartels. The Mexican cartels made the decision to send the Haitians to the southern border, to Del Rio, and to send them over in an invasion. And the Democrats welcomed them. Well, the same thing is happening in Spain, and it is horrifying. And I say this without hyperbole. I think we are witnessing civilizational suicide in Europe.
I agree.
They are destroying the great nations of Europe. And understand, this is not happening accidentally. It's just like what happened in Texas for the 4 years of the Biden administration, where the invasion was by design. The left hates the West.
Yep.
This is what Mondami and the other communists wants. This is what the DSA wants. When they say open borders, when they say abolish ICE, they want this invasion for the same purpose. It's the same reason the socialists in Spain, who unfortunately are in control of that government, they want to destroy Spanish civilization, and tragically, these American leftists want to destroy American civilization.
You know, I was talking about this earlier today, and I want to get your take on this, but one of the things I said was, I think part of the reason why we're witnessing these types of invasions, and really it's happening not just in Spain, but we're seeing massive illegal immigration numbers all throughout Europe that have spiked. And as you described it, I think it's spot on that we're watching the crumbling of civilization and actually having pride in a nation, right? You just get rid of the nation. It's kumbayaism of the left and the commies and the socialists. But I also think part of why this is happening right now in Europe is Donald Trump won re-election, got back to the White House by saying, I'm going to secure the southern border and I'm going to stop the invasion that you're witnessing on TV, the videos that you took. I still go back to that moment where I think we saw the tide change, and that was when the federal government under the Biden administration used that forklift and raised up that barbed wire in Texas, and people came flooding into America. That, for me, was a picture's worth, right, 1,000 words, however you want to describe it. But when you can't come to America anymore, the way that you were able to by the millions and millions under the Biden and the Obama administration combined and the leftist policies, where are you going to go next? Europe. Europe would be your next stop, and now they're getting what would have a lot of people that probably would have tried to keep coming to America if the Democrats were in charge.
Well, and this is also the Islamization of Europe. These illegal immigrants that are invading the country, they are essentially entirely Muslim. And you're saying, you know, there was a meme online that showed President Trump flying in Air Force One and looking out the window and saying, my goodness, Pakistan is just horrible what's happening there. And an aide stops and says, Mr. President, that's London.
Yeah.
Like, Europe is deliberately, and we're seeing this throughout Europe, has allowed the entire continent to face an invasion from the Middle East, face an invasion from Africa, and it has changed the underlying character of the continent. And you're seeing the consequences. Look, I think Europe is foreshadowing where the United States will go if we don't stop this.
Amen.
And it's about 10 years ahead of us. So in some ways you can look to Spain, and it's like you're looking at a crystal ball. You can see, and by the way, it'll happen faster than 10 years. If, God forbid, Elizabeth Warren or Gavin Newsom or AOC becomes president, the same invasion we're seeing in Spain, the same invasion that we saw under Joe Biden, will happen again. And the reason is the same, because the left, they want these illegal immigrants to destroy Western civilization, to destroy American civilization, to tear down the Constitution, the foundations of free enterprise, the foundations of rule of law. And you know, I have to wonder what a typical Spanish citizen is thinking right now. And listen, what I fear is that what they might be thinking is the same thing that the idiot voters who voted for Mondami and the other communists in America are thinking, which is, this is a great thing. This is a wonderful thing. I don't know if they're looking away and just averting their eyes, or if they think, wonderful, what a blessing. But I'll tell you one thing that is deeply chilling about these images. The videos that are coming up, the videos I saw, there was not a single woman, there was not a single child.
Yeah.
These are all military age men. They're men from about 15 to about 40.
Yeah.
And they're coming one after the other, after the other, after the other. And by the way, like one fellow on Twitter put out a very good question. He said, what is the purpose of having an army if thousands of foreign invaders can just cross your border and invade your country? Because that is what is happening. And
by the way, no vetting. Let's be clear. There was a really interesting video that got released. It showed the government opening up a gate and allowing men. There was no women or children. Hundreds and hundreds were rushing. I don't know how deep it was. I mean, it could be thousands and thousands. No one is vetting if these are terrorists, if they're drug cartel members, if they're setting up human trafficking.
And we know they are. We know they are. We know that there are terrorists among them. We know that there are cartel members and criminals and murderers and rapists. We know that because that's what happened in America. It's what's happening there, too, and it is part of the left's design.
As always, thank you for listening to Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Don't forget to download my podcast, and you can listen to my podcast every other day you're not listening to Verdict, or each day when you listen to Verdict afterwards. I'd love to have you as a listener to, again, the Ben Ferguson podcast, and we will see you back here on Monday morning.